Hi, thank you so much for having me here, and it's a pleasure to talk to Jerry, whose Facebook posts I follow, and I really like them. It's a very interesting book, and I read it yesterday and on the flight, and I've been reading it this morning. And obviously, I would like to begin with this question as to what made you translate the hymns of Tukaram, and what was the motive, and then we'll go on to the translation question. But what was the thing? You've written it in your introduction, but yeah.
I'd like to go back a little to the point at which I started translating the Bhakti poets. The first encounter that I had with the Bhakti poets in a real kind of, in the sense of want of thinking even about translating them, happened very oddly in a gym in Mahim. Now, you know that gyms generally have this kind of real percussion music, jin chaka, jin chaka, jin chaka, jin chaka, which is supposed to encourage you to walk faster on the treadmill or do more exercise or whatever. But that day, that gym's music system had failed. And on the treadmill next to me was Neela Bhagwat, a very renowned classical singer, and the only classical singer, I think, of whom you could ask make impertinent requests. Like, for instance, I've seen Neela sing in coffee shops, whereas most classical musicians want a mridangam, and they want, they want like 500 different things, and they want everyone to sit down and be quiet and pay attention. So I turned to Neela, who was there, and in a spirit of mischief, I said, Neela, why don't you sing something? We don't have music. And she began to sing Mungi Udali Akashi. Now, Mungi Udali Akash, the good thing about when someone is singing Indian classical song or music of any kind is that they don't go from one sentence to the next, from one phrase to the next. They wander around, they'll sing the same sentence again and again, the same phrase again and again, exploring its beauty. And that really allowed me to think about what she was singing. So this Mungi Udali Akashi is a miracle poem. It suggests that when God happens in your life, anything is possible. It just like the world explodes. So an ant could fly into the sky and it could swallow the sun. Mungi Udali Akashi, Tine Gilile Suryashi. Then she swallowed the sun. And I kept thinking as I listened to her sing this Mungi Udali Akashi, Tinigul, again and again, circling around it with her magical voice, I kept thinking, what does this mean actually? Why this image? Why not any other image? And the image came to me of a little girl, sort of like playing in the maybe playing in the ground like that, and then picking up an ant and closing one eye and blotting out the sun with the head of the ant very gently, and then maybe putting it back down because this is a young saint in the making. So she's not going to be mean to the ant even. Okay? And at the end of this thing, at the end of this moment, I turned to Neela and I said, Neela, this is such a beautiful thing. I would love to read these. Where can I read them? And of course, what I meant is I wanted to read them in English because I'm lazy like everybody else on our great subcontinent. I don't want to do the work of having to read 13th century Marathi and try and figure out what is going on. I'd rather just have it all served up to me as English. She said, no one's translated Muktabai. So I said, let's do it. And this is one of my constant things, right? When I hear a great Urdu poem, I go up to that person and say, let's translate these together. Let's just let's do 100 Urdu poems everyone should know. Let's do 100 Marathi poems everyone should know. Let's do 100. And they all say yes, 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 and then no one gets down to it. And they go away and I go away and life goes on. But Neela was different. About 3 weeks later, she turned up at my house with a bunch of poems and she said, here's the 100 poems I think we should translate. And I thought, oh shit, it's work now. But it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful because each one, Neela would sing for me. And when she had finished singing it, I would work on it. And then I would give it back to her and she would say yes, no, maybe. And then And so out of that, I will give you just one poem to give you the feeling of the ant who swallowed the sun, and to give you the feeling of my two best friends from the 13th century, Muktabai and Soirabai, whom I would have loved to have a conversation with because they're just such interesting original minds. Muktabai's Joy and Sorrow. First came joy, and on the morrow, hard on her heels, a visit from sorrow. Just as we settled down to grieving, sorrow announced that she was leaving. Joy and sorrow, what's the difference? Both are sisters, born of ignorance. Muktai tells Sangya, self-born the soul, standing like a banyan, erect and whole. Okay, so that's one of my favorite poems from. Thank you so much. I accept the applause as applause for Muktabai, my 13th century best BFF. Okay. When it came out, when this book came out, it was published as The Ant Who Swallowed the Sun, translated by Neela Bhagwat and Jerry Pinto, which I thought was only fair because we worked together. And also I thought was safe because these days, it's difficult. It's difficult to be Jerry Pinto translating Muktabai and Soirabai. I thought that would make it slightly easier. And then, in the way that it is, Muktabai woke me up to the fact that I had an earlier relationship with these guys, with the Bhakti poets of the Varkari tradition. I suddenly remembered that in school we had learned Tukaram. And now I'm coming
Class 8th.
Yeah, class 8 actually. Zeka ranzale ganzale, tosi mane jo apule, tosi sadhu volkhava, devate techi zanava. I still remember it because we were made to learn this poem by heart and we wrote it out 100 times of homework. All those impositions that were put on poetry that drove us away from poetry, that made us feel that poetry was one of those horrible things that happened to you in school, that made you, where you had to learn up things by heart and demonstrate your memory. It was not about love, it was not about beauty, it was not about felicity, it was only about memory. But this poem came back. Suddenly it was there. And I thought now I might want to understand this poem. Now I might want to see what this poem means. And when I started translating it, for me the central sound is ranzale ganzale. It means rusted and worn out. But that's ranz, nanz coming together, ganzale. That has the sound of rusty things rubbing against each other. I wanted that sound, and I suddenly felt, is Tukaram saying, translate me? Now, Tukaram has been translated. Dilip Chitre spent his life, a great poet of Bombay, spent his life and said at the end of his life that he would like to be remembered as the translator of Tukaram. And says Tuka came out in the year dot. I don't even know when it came out. It came out and became part of my literary landscape. It was just there. You read it from time to time. It was on your shelves. It's just like, it seemed to be as long as Tukaram. So now you're up against this big boy, Dilip Chitre. And I thought, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because if there is one thing about the Bhakti movement, if it is one thing about the Varkari movement, which we seem to have forgotten today, it was that everyone's invited. Come. Come. This is such fun. Come. You listen to Lalla, which my friend Ranjit translated. Lalla compares Bhakti to a cellar full of alcohol. She says, there's good stuff here. Come and drink. Okay? Actually, this is how I thought all religion should be. All the way of the spirit should be. A huge path. And everybody who wants to walk on that path is welcome to try. It may not be for everybody. As all the bhakti poets warn us relentlessly, this is tough. This is going to demand something of you. It's going to ask something of you. Okay? You are going to change dramatically now. This won't be the same. Bahina Bai says wonderfully, in my heart, the sky spoke in thunder. Okay? How can you live through a moment like that and not feel its glory, its wonder? And that brings me back to that Mungi Udali Akashi moment, right? Is the swallowing of the sun actually a way of saying, God filled me and I melted down into gold and lava. I just melted because God arrived. That was the bhakti movement. Who cared if your name was Jerry Pinto? Who cared if you were a Shudra? Who cared if you were a Brahmin? The doors were open. In this marga. Not in the temple where they only saw his feet. Not where they had to sit outside the temple. All that, yes. But on this marg, it was open. And in this time of closing doors and people insisting on certain sad forms of identity politics, Tukaram seemed like an invitation, a memory of a time when we could all just explore ourselves and our love of something bigger than the small quotidian day that we have.
Could that brings me to the next question. You start the book with the poem where Namdev visits Tukaram in his dream and says there's more work to be done, and I've done this bit and now you do the rest. And you also translate this book with Shanta Gokhale, and you guys have two versions. One is her translation and the other is yours. And there's a marked difference between the two, although they are also very similar. So I just wanted to ask you about, firstly, you have mentioned Dilip Chitre and the film that Shanta Gokhale mentions also. So there was a lot that was already done in terms of abhangas that are being sung. But why did you decide, and you also say that Tukaram belongs to the future, which is coming to the point, and this is Kerala, so we can say it here, in the whole polarization situation, you need this bhakti poet thing. So just wanted to ask about the act of translation itself and how that, translation is also a political thing, very. So how did you go about that? Because yours, when she mentions Vaikunt, you don't mention Vaikunt, you actually say heaven. So just wanted to ask about that.
No. Okay. When you are working as a translator, right, many things come into play. And you're right, translation is a political act. Bhakti was looked at politically as well. I mean, yesterday I was in conversation with Ashok Gopal, and Ambedkar Sahab has a very strong critique of Bhakti as, it became another tool for Savarnas to hit at the lower caste, saying that when you are like Sokha Mela, when you are like Tukaram, then you can be, then we can celebrate you, but till then, you're still who you are. And when I wrote Heaven, I wanted to say, I'm Jerry Pinto. I'm a Roman Catholic by birth. I am many things by my living. I have explored and walked down many paths. I have gathered much good from many places of deep spiritual encounter. Like I have loved the Conference of the Birds. I enjoyed that book so much in such a deep way. I've loved so many different things, and I have never felt in any point of my life that I have been unfaithful to any tradition, because I have been faithful in my love of all traditions that open themselves to the magic of language. Okay? Because that is at the center of it all. Behold, the word is God, Tukaram says. How can you not love a guy like that? Behold, the Word is God. Okay? And then for me, that went back to St. John's Gospel, the beginning of St. John's magisterial, strange Gospel. You know, in biblical studies, they say that there are three Gospels which are synoptic: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All look at Jesus in a certain way, and there is John's Gospel, which is very different and startling. And John's Gospel starts with, the Word was God. Okay? And that is so much, like, I mean, you know, like bells ringing, a temple bell ringing there, and a church bell ringing here, and both are chiming inside my head, and I am living in that music, and I will not deny myself that music. I will not let external factors deny me that music. I will live with the authenticity of my experience, in which heaven and Vaikuntha say the same thing to me. They say the same thing to me. And I am your translator at this moment. I am fractured. Every translator wants to be glass, right? Through which light will pass with no change. But we are prisms. We are triangular. The light passes through us and it refracts and it turns into a rainbow of many colors on this side. And you will forgive that. You will forgive that, because when you are reading it, when you are reading my translation, you are a prism yourself. And now, as a prism, you change the light that is passing through you, and you bring it out again. This is the collective act of reading, which is not very different from the collective act of bhakti. What is the word? What is the meaning? What is this whole thing we do together? This moment when you have chosen to step out of your life and to give some moment to another person's creativity or endeavor, okay? Together all of us celebrate at a literary festival the joy and the experience of what words can do for us at a certain point, at every point of our lives, okay? And why would anybody allow themselves any rukawat, any badha, any obstacle? They're only there to be jumped over.
My next question is also about the fact, Tukaram disappeared at the age of 42, and, in his lifetime, he belonged to what they refer to as lower caste, and he was, a shopkeeper as well, doing well. And then suddenly, the Brahmins obviously had a problem with this kind of stuff. So basically, they asked him to drown his manuscript in the river. And then, there's this one thing that you mentioned where, nobody knows where the manuscript floated back up or not, but Tukaram disappeared. So I just wanted to, relate that to now, where you have so many fractured, in a fractured landscape like ours, for instance. How do you even translate God in the context of his life and what is happening now, in the country? So if you could, and also your translations, because they're more contemporary, more personal, more individualized in that sense.
One of the great things about not being a translation theorist is that you have no problems with following a theory. You're only working with the poem as it exists in front of you, and you're thinking of how you will do a poem on this side, okay? Like you're just working with these two things. Now, with the stories of Tukaram, with that, the great Bijki Vahi, the wet manuscript that Arun Kolatkar has talked about so beautifully in his poems, and this is, the wonder of language is that it is so beautiful and so fulfilling, and the terror of language is that it excludes people who cannot read it, and therefore we need translation. So I'm asking this one fundamental question. Which of you has learnt your religion in the original text? I do not speak the language Jesus spoke. Jesus spoke Aramaic. His words do not come to us in Aramaic, oh no. The evangelists record his words in Greek. The 4 Gospels are written in Greek because these guys knew that Aramaic is going to be spoken in a very small community. And they were urgent, right? They felt this stuff you got to know. You all have to know this stuff. It's good news. Here, read it. So they went to Demotic Greek, which is really like writing scripture in Bambaiya Hindi, in Tapori Hindi. Writing it in a popular language like, say, maybe Stardust, so that it will get to you. And I learned this in translation because someone has translated the Bible and I was told it in Konkani and in English. You were probably told the stories of your religion in Malayalam, in Hindi, in Gujarati, in the language your grandmother knew. How much we owe to translation. How much we owe to the fact that language has never allowed itself to live in a silo. But it has found ways to break out, to push through, to get at you and grab you. That's what translation does for us. I have a poem about translation, an ABC poem, which I didn't bring. I should have. A is for Andal, A is for Akmatova, A is for, B is for Basho, B is for Bahinabai, C is for, D is for, E is for, F is for. You can create a list of all the people you have read. And forgotten they were Russian, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. Forgotten they were Spanish, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Forgotten they were Italian, Goscinny and Uderzo, Asterix comics. How much riches translation has brought us. So to say to yourself, we have a polarized world, we do. We have a fractured world, we do. To accept this polarization and fracture and then try to manipulate around it is not our job. Our job is to bridge, to connect, to hold on, to reach out. That's our job. And maybe nobody's listening, but we will broadcast. We will try and listen. That's our work. Listening and broadcasting. And we will do it.
And the next question is about poetry itself. Now we live in a different kind of time where people are obviously obsessed with social media and memes and reels and all kinds of things. And poetry, of course, is not really on top of their list. And across the world and over the years, we have seen less reviews of poetry books. And it's not going to make you money. And we just came out with a whole issue on poems, actually. So I just wanted to ask you about the place of poetry in today's discourse in terms of translation. Also, the translator himself, herself, or themselves, how are they placing themselves? Because you're also translating somebody from the 17th century. So, it's also there. The poet is not accessible to you. So how do you place yourself over there? Or what is that act? And what is the place of poetry? And obviously, this is a very interesting book in terms of, the subaltern, and Gayatri Spivak says the subaltern must speak. So all these 3 things, if you could answer.
Okay, to begin with, when people say to me, I don't read poetry anymore, my only response is my condolences. When did that happen? Have you been to a doctor? Can you do something about it? It's possible, try, okay? Because can you imagine a life without poetry? Can you imagine a nation without an anthem? Can you imagine a revolution without a song? Can you imagine a life without poetry? That would be a life without a soul. So if you have stopped reading poetry, I completely understand. I get it. I'm not judging you. I am, but I try very hard to restrain my judgment because I'll say this, find your way back somehow. And it's a very simple act. Go to the bookshop now and buy a book of poetry. Not necessarily mine, and keep it by your bedside. Just before you go to sleep, read a poem, one poem, and see how your dreams change. And when your dreams change, the rest of the day changes. Try a poem. Open a window. Let a poem come in. That's my answer to the poetry part of it. The 17th century, I have the feeling that we are all very old and we are all very contemporary at the same time, right? Like when you're reading, say, Shakespeare around the same time, you're reading Tukaram, and many of the things that they're saying, you're thinking, shit, yes. Gosh, yeah, I understand. I'm feeling that way. It just seems so, like in the, the ant who swallowed the sun, there are some women who are who are talking to God in the most abusive manner, because they are the wives and mothers of the poet saints who are spending their time dancing and singing and happy. And this woman is saying, Gonai is saying, I have 14 mouths to feed and there's no grain in the house. What are you doing, God? And what is he doing? Okay? It's this kind of protest, which does not mean that they do not believe in God. To address God at all, you must believe there is someone there, even if you are doing Ninda Stuti, right? So, our common humanity, the fact that we will live through the same things and feel the same fears and feel the same horrors and feel the same joys and delights, that's what links us across time. Now there is the problem of would you like the thing to be in metrical form, or am I allowed to do a little modern work and whatnot? That, but out. Okay? Fundamentally, if you don't like what I did with Tukaram, please come to the party. Do some Tukaram translation. Show me how it should be done. I'll be delighted to know. Yeah? So, for me, time zones are invented. They are, Titan has to worry about time zones and GM Greenwich Observatory has to worry about time zones. I open a book and I slip through time. I slip through time. And now soon, even the young people in the audience will know that Harry Potter will be seen as a classic of your time. Really? Someone said that to me, a young chap, 12-year-old in a bookshop. He said, I don't read the classics, when someone asked him to read Harry Potter. And I wanted to thump him on the back, but it's just such fun. Time is really immaterial in reading. The time zone of the production of the work has nothing to do with anybody. The reason why, secret. The reason why we write is because we are mortal. And we want to beat mortality. We want our words to live beyond us. That's why we write. Okay? It's as simple as that. Some of us get there, some of us don't. We know, for instance, Shakespeare almost didn't until he was resurrected, literally. But that's the point. The point is, how are you dealing with the materiality of the poem? How are you dealing with its backlog, with its vast arenas of experience? Yeah? Have you dealt with that successfully or not? The time zone doesn't bother.
And the other thing I wanted to ask, in your intro, you also mentioned that you didn't really agree with the fact that he called foolish people Chandal, and there was this whole thing about the atheists, it's more of a faith thing. So as a translator, I've always been interested in understanding how do you look at your own politics and the person you are translating. And you've also said this, that the writer we talk a lot about writers, but we don't really talk about translators, which is also very, very interesting, because then I don't know how you suspend judgment. Do you suspend it? Do you not suspend it? How do you access it? And how do you, like, in these two, one little two-line thing you mentioned about the Chandal and the other one. So how do you step aside? I mean, how do you not, how do you take that position, and how do you can, I mean, and you are also translating God, for instance, his love for God. So how do you do that? How do you?
If we were to throw out of the window everything that was flawed, we would be left with nothing, with literally nothing. Okay? You take I will take the Bible as the simplest example, because no one will take offense, because that's supposed to be my religion. Has anyone ever asked you, ever tried to decode this rubbish about my religion? How did it become your religion? You just got born somewhere, right? How is it that you want to protect your God when it's his job to be protecting you, largely? Doesn't matter. So I'm talking about the Bible. The Bible is fabulous in its gynophobia and its misogyny. Okay? So many men love the Bible for its misogyny. Many women will not read the Bible because it's misogynistic, and many feminists will read the Bible and insist on reinterpreting it for their purposes. So I believe, okay, here's the thing about politics, okay? Every one of us believes our politics are correct. We believe my politics are correct and your politics are wrong and a little bit flawed, but if you agreed with me, then your politics would be correct. This is the right wing and the left liberal, everybody in between, everyone has a political stand, and even the apolitical have a political stand, which is being apolitical, and all of us feel if you listened to me and agreed with me, then you would be correct. This is the ego speaking, more than anything else. This is what the poet saints could see through. They could see that your correctness is only one part of your illusion, a large illusion in which you have lived, and which you are working at with huge psychic energy to try and support, constantly patching up the holes in it to try and support it. I try to live a little more openly. I try to read and say, oh, well, yeah, he says Chandal when he means stupid person. That's not something I would do. But 300 years from now, if someone reads my work, they will no doubt find things that are objectionable, because they will have a different way of looking at language, and I hope that they will be as generous to me as I want to be in my reading, because I believe my heart will get stronger and warmer if I open it out and let you flood me. And I believe that if I close my heart and only let in the things I believe in, it will get weaker and it will end up being the suspicious, hateful person whom I do not want to be. That's how I will live. I do not say this is how you should live. You are entitled entirely to your political stance, to your pain, to your rage, to your sorrow, to your grief, to whatever it is that it is, you are entitled to it. But this is how I tell you I will live. I will live trying to be a ear and a heart.
And I mean, I also wanted to ask you to recite one of the poems that in the book. I mean, if you have a selection, otherwise I also marked one. But I bookmarked it. Yeah, this one. And after, maybe you could tell us the difference from your perspective between your translation and Shanta Gokhale's, who also kind of, yeah.
First, I will read Shanta Gokhale's translation. And like very often during the course of this experience, what we would do is we would like decide that so and so number, we would do this one, Zeka Ranzale Ganzale, for instance. And then she would work on it and I would work on it, and then we'd exchange kind of, versions. And immediately I would think, why didn't I think of that? Okay, because you see someone else working on the same thing and producing something so different. And that was lovely in a way. They always talk about this journey and destination and whatnot. This is the destination, and I'm very happy with this destination. I love this destination, but the journey was very precious as well, okay? Because you're working with a fine mind and a lovely intellect and a warm spirit, and you don't get those all wrapped up in one person. I think I have 2 out of 3. I don't know which 2, but I'm working on the 3rd as well. Shuddha Shuddhi Nivade Kaise. Shanta Gokhale. What is pure and impure? Skin and flesh are the same. None is more, none less. God does not discriminate. Water is no different whether in well or river. The sun falls fair and square on earth's every corner. Milk is of one color, no matter the cow, its color. Clay is finally clay, whether as pot or pitcher. A furnace and a flame, both are equally fire. Says Tuka, forget the container. Are the contents poison or nectar? And now, this is Jerry Pinto, same poem. When we share the same flesh, the same blood, who can tell pure from impure? Stream, well, rivulet, pond, river, sea, all water, the same water. Does the sun choose where to shine? His rays flood the entire earth. What matters the color of the cow when we know her milk is always white? Name the earthen pot what you will, they are all made of the same clay. Fire is one in all its forms. No spark is purer than another. Tuka says, ignore the pot. Ask what's inside, poison or nectar. And we've left space at the bottom of the page. Do your version.
Thank you so much. And we have some time left, so I thought maybe it would be a good idea to... Yeah, of course. Yeah.
One of the other things that I've worked on is this book called In That Mill I Too Was Forged. Okay? And it's a... Narayan Surve, man, he was found in a dustbin by his parents, who brought him up till the age of 10. And then they gave him 10 rupees. And they said, we are going back to the village, look after yourself. 10 years old. It's a great, he became one of the great poets of Bombay, of my city, a folk poet. And I want to read a poem called Asagami Brahma. Just such a Brahma am I. Over my shoulder I toss the cosmic egg of creation and settle down to resolve the space-time equation. Outside the door of my home, the world's pleasure gardens disport. I yank at the rein of the sun, and old Sol he pulls up short. Great herds of cloud pachyderms stand and wait on my whim. With the nectar of the immortals, I fill my jar to the brim. In my courtyard, urchin winds dance and spin their tops. The doors of heaven glint and sparkle with glittering drops. With my brawny arm, it is I who steadies the sky when it's slipping. And when it behaves badly, it is I who give it a whipping. With each mountain a mustard seed, each mustard seed a mountain, and both immanent in me, both mine to contain. just such a Brahma am I, linchpin of earthly might, a Brahma with no home that he can claim by right. Narayan Surve.
Thank you so much. And we'll open it to questions. But before that, I just wanted to say one thing that as a journalist, we have always looked at the poets for the truth because we are living in very strange times where we don't know what is true and what's not true. And I think the poets have done a fantastic job of looking at things, compressing things and talking, about the fears, the love, the loss. And I think the poetry is the only thing that can actually measure loss or love or everything. So thank you. So I just wanted to ask if anybody has a question, will we have some time?
Hello, sir. Thank you, Jerry Pinto. That was wonderful. Actually, the Abang says, Veda nahi nahi kalala antaparayacha parabrahma hai bhaktan sati kasa pragadala asa vitevar. How the cult of Vitoba of Pandharpur has been influencing? Has it ever been influenced you while you are translating Tukaram, the hymns of Tukaram? Just want to know. That's it. That's it.
Just in case you didn't get it, there is no Hindu god who stands like that, okay, with his arms akimbo and this position. And because the story of Vithoba is based on the fact that the devotee is greater than the god at that moment. Because, the story is that one day Vishnu arrives in a space in Maharashtra, and he remembers, oops, there was a devotee to whom he had promised that he would appear. So he decides that he would go and appear to this devotee, and the devotee is serving his parents at that point, looking after them. So he turns and sees God. God has arrived, and this I think could only have happened in Maharashtra and maybe in Kerala. So he takes a brick and he throws it across and he says, stand on that and wait while I finish looking after my parents. So the god gets onto the brick and stands like that. It's like, really? This is how you treat God in these parts? I so love this story. I so love this story because it tells you a lot about how gods and men interact with each other in a real fundamental fashion. That's what Vithoba did for me. Yeah?
Anyone else has a question or?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for this wonderful dialogue. I would like to call it a dialogue. And just to know how fine the line is between between a space between interpreting and translating. Like how brave or generous one can be while doing that. Interpretation and translating, the same.
See, I think you can't do translation without interpretation, okay? It's as simple as this, okay? In the Mungi Udali Akashi poem, right? There is a moment where she says, Vinsu Patala Shizai, which means the scorpion burrows into the underworld. Now, this is a miracle poem, right? The miracle poem, what is miraculous about a scorpion burrowing into the underworld, for heaven's sake? I mean, that's what scorpions do, right? They are subterranean creatures. And then I remembered that in Khajuraho, when the sculptors wanted to show that a woman was in the throes of sexual lust, they would carve a scorpion on her thigh. This goes through our popular aesthetic as well. Bichhu lad gaya re mujhe bichhu lad gaya. Sare badan mein zahar chad gaya. Right? That's like and jao 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 kisi vaidya ko bulao. Okay? So this is the way we looked at scorpions as representations of lust. And therefore, Vinsu Patalashi Zai is a way of saying simply, lust and desire will fall away from you. Okay? Now, when I'm translating the poem, which do I stay with? lust and desire will fall away from you, or the scorpion burrows into the underworld. Fundamentally, our loyalty to the poem requires us to say, you have a scorpion in the poem, don't do away with the scorpion. Interpretation says it will make more sense to the reader if they know what the scorpion symbolizes. So what do? You do a footnote. What else do you do? It's what you can do. It's a bad solution, but it's a solution that is the way we work with it. It's okay, like, one very sweet example was when I was reading with a group of slum kids, English, because they wanted to improve their English literature, their English speaking skills. So I would read stories to them. And there was one story in which she relaxed in a bath. And this girl sitting next to me said, how she relaxes in a bath? You have to do so much work, pouring water on yourself and all. So I said, their bath na, they lie in the water. This was like, everybody was very struck by this lying in the water. So all language, because it is also a repository of cultural meaning, will have these moments when it is going to ambush you. So you're going to have to work with that, and that's where I think for me, interpretation and explanation and translation begin to become kind of, yeah. One minute, there was a gentleman there.
Hi, Jerry. Yeah, that was truly ecstatic. I really loved hearing you speak. Please stand up as much as you please when you talk. I just was wanting to, you were speaking about how poetry isn't read so often. What is read often is self-help books and is fiction, and I kind of wanted to hear you maybe talk about poetry as it's situated in the broader literature marketplace today, if that's something you'd be happy to do. I also know you're a novelist, so yeah, thank you.
Poetry has, at one level, let me just say one thing very clearly. Poetry has always been an enterprise that requires some rigor. It requires work, it requires effort. This has always been true, whether you read the 16th century or you read today. And people often talk loosely about, in Shakespeare's time. Yeah, but Shakespeare put his poems to music and put them on a stage and had like fun with them, right? So then it became easier. And we are constantly being asked, poetry is constantly being asked to provide a raison d'etre. Why are you doing poetry? And, some people say, because it's like language, and some people say it's because poetry can heal you. Kindly duck off. Poetry requires no reason to be. You require a reason. If you require a reason for poetry to be, ask yourself, what is your reason to be? Why are you here? Can you give a coherent, clear answer? Or are you just an accident of genetics, timing, and maybe some larger spirit that we know nothing about? Why do we need all things to prove themselves to us? The proof is that despite the fact that most people will not buy poetry, do not buy poetry, people still want to write it. So that wellspring is somewhere very deep. It's deeper than commerce. Commerce is the top layer. And if a book doesn't sell, I feel so little, I don't feel particularly bad about it. I feel every poem will find its reader. And that's enough. That's enough. The rest of it is, poetry books don't sell, blah, 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 blah. Buck off. I don't care. I'm not in this game because I want 100,000 copies to sell. If they did, I would be happy, I have to say. But if they don't, I'll manage. I'll manage on the leavings of the novelists and the writers with little money. You have 150 rupees spare. You might buy a book of poetry, bless you. don't buy, bless you too still. Because really, if you're not buying poetry and not reading poetry, I feel sorry for you. What can I say?
No, I mean, also publishers should look at poetry more, I feel. There's one person who had a question there.
Hi Jerry, my name is Girija. Sorry about my ignorance because I live abroad. I haven't had a chance to read your work, but I just googled you and I saw that you were here during the 2018 Kerala Literature Festival. Question number 1, have you been coming here every year? Question number 2, can you tell us a bit about your journey? How did you start? How did you get fascinated by the work that you're doing right now?
One, I am a poor writer. So when I'm invited, I come. They don't invite every year, so I don't come every year. But when they invite, I say, yes, happy to come, and I give dates and times. Okay, I'll be frank. And why should they invite every year? There are lots of people who also you should listen to. Second question is, I think from childhood, I thought that the world of words was a safe place. Because the books that I read seemed like they were warm and comforting. I was reading the ordinary, everyday children's books that we all read as children. Channamama, Champak, and Amar Chitrakatha and Enid Blyton. That was my world. It was very comforting. And then I discovered that when you started reading beyond those, the world of words was terrifying and exciting and sensual and everything. So it became an addiction. Now when you have read, and my father did a very interesting thing. My father refused to allow us to buy books until we were 21. That was the house rule. You could not buy a book until you were 21 because the rule was you will buy rubbish books which you will want to throw out after that. So my sister and I became book smugglers. We bought books on the sly, and like we were smuggling drugs, I would put them in my pant and I would come in like that. And then at the age of 13, my moment happened. I went to a public circulating library, very ordinary public circulating library, but Girija, in a corner, in a cupboard, there were 17 volumes of the Arabian Nights by Sir Richard Burton in translation, 11 volumes and 6 supplementary nights. And I thought, oh, Mother of God, whatever this is, I want to have it. Okay? So I turned to the owner and I said, how much, Bhai Sahab? He said, 700 rupees. 700 rupees when I was 13. My father's salary was about 5,000 rupees. So I said, I can't pay right now, but I have 10 rupees and I will pay you every week, but don't sell them. So he said, okay. So I started paying every week. And whenever I finished a certain amount of 10 rupees, he would let me take one book home. And again, I would go home like that, sort of like hiding it inside my thing. And finally, I had the 17 volumes, and I so loved them that I did not read them. I just wanted them, and I had them, and I did not read them till the time of COVID, when you were stuck at home. So I thought, okay, Burton, it's your time in the sun. Let's read you. Took it out, started reading it, and thought, oh, Mother of God, 17 more volumes. Because this is like long passages of very boring stuff. I read the whole 17 volumes, and I sent them off to the Bombay University Library, and they are gone. But I think when you have become a book addict, then you want your name on the spine of a book. And so then you'll do anything, including writing your first book, which was called Surviving Women. Believe it or not. Thank you all. I think we
have one last question and then we're out of time. I think we're already out of time. So
we started late. Any last question? Firu. We'll give Firu a...
Sir, I wanted to ask you about Bhakti Moment. Like Bhakti Moment is about loving life and live life with love in your heart. And you said about ripping your heart and putting it out there. So what do you think, like you need, like sometimes we need to protect our heart and ourselves. So like how do you put it out there and then, find that balance so that you can love life and live with love inside you?
You have to learn to love rejection.
Okay.
Once you have learned to love rejection, living the exposed life, the life that is exposed to experience, becomes easier. But if you expect acceptance all the time, remember that even the bhakti poets experience deep rejection of their poetry, of their quest, of their honesty, of their integrity. They were beaten, they were made to immerse their poems in the river. All kinds of terrible things happened to them, but they moved on. We must learn in some ways that the world is a buffet, and and rejection is part of that buffet, and rejection has Mamang Dai. Any poet here will tell you rejection is a great place to write poetry.
Thank you, sir. It was mesmerizing listening to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Jerry. It was a wonderful. Yeah, I already ate like 5.